Hey everybody. A quick note before starting today's episode. This episode marks the 1-year anniversary of Psychotropic. I just wanted to give thanks. Thank you for supporting the show. Thank you for listening. Thank you for writing in and giving me your feedback. And thank you for all the reviews. The fact is that a year ago today, I wasn't sure how all of this was going to go. I wasn't sure if it would be well received, if people would be into this sort of thing. But it turns out that this is something that people are interested in. People like you. And so I just wanted to show my appreciation. Thank you, everybody. I definitely look forward to doing this for another year. Having said all that, I hope you enjoy today's episode. If you decide you want to write in and give me your feedback, share a story, you can do all that at psychotropicpodcast.com. And if you like today's episode, definitely leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. So, at that, on with the show. I hope you enjoy. In your email, you had talked about a bad drug experience with this drug called 2,5-I and Bone.
I acquired what I was thinking was LSD from a friend of a friend who now runs a practice where he is a white person who calls himself a shaman, which, as far as I can tell, means that he did like a week-long workshop in shamanism in some remote place and then came back and decided that's what he was.
Psychotropic presents Shane.
So I kind of tangentially knew the person who sold it to me, and I had taken it probably like 5 times before this particular trip. But it was maybe an hour in after taking it that I knew what I had taken was not LSD. It's really hard still to describe, but it set me into kind of this. It's the closest thing to psychosis that I think I've experienced. When people describe that, it felt like I was kind of in this cartoonish world. Like visually, things started becoming a cartoon, and I was just entirely hallucinating everything. I was with my friend, and we had taken it together, and I remember having conversations with her that in retrospect didn't happen. And she told me I like ran away from her at one point, and then she started hallucinating, and I don't remember any of that. It kind of culminated in what I think my brain decided was sort of the worst kind of possible realities it could imagine, kind of played out over and over. So one of them was that I was shot repeatedly. Like I kept re-hallucinating it, and it was being shot like in front of pretty much like all of my loved ones were just like watching this happen. So it was basically I didn't come down from that state for hours, and my friend, I guess it had impacted her a little bit less because she had the wherewithal to call EMTs or call 911, and I don't remember. The only thing I really remember that I believe happened, I was still really like out of it while I was when they took me to the hospital. But I think the thing that actually that did happen was they wanted, they didn't really recognize what was going on, and they wanted this identifying information, like personal information, like my emergency contact and that sort of thing. And I remember insisting on, I had hallucinated before Trump was president, like a year before, that he was. And so I insisted on them telling me who the president was because I was terrified that was real. So I was like, before I give you anything, I need you to fucking tell me if this is real. I still remember having really stilted conversations with medical professionals where, like, I was still in this completely different world where, I remember talking to one of them about shamanism randomly, and just none of them knew how to react to me, and they called my emergency contact, who was my mom, and told them that I had overdosed, which wasn't true. It was more that I had passed out, and it was drug induced, but their concern was really more that I had passed out in like this forest. I took it in the woods, and they were more concerned about like what it's called rhabdomyolysis, where like your muscles kind of give out from, I guess, exhaustion after the psychotic adventures I had had. So I stayed in the hospital for 2 days for that. So it wasn't an overdose. The reason that I think it was not LSD was for many, many reasons. Like I said, I had taken it before. I don't know for certain that it was 25I. I just know from reading more that it's commonly touted as LSD increasingly, and that it's something that's led to deaths, and it's greatly increases your chances of psychosis and other negative experiences, really similar to the ones that I had. I don't know how common it is like nationwide, but I'm in DC and Maryland, so at least here I know that it's increasingly a thing, and I know that it's increasingly a concern with harm reductionists at music festivals, that they've seen it pop up more and more with like dance safe testing people's drugs before they take it. So that was kind of my assumption, was that it was 25I or some other research chemical, just based on like the mutual reaction my friend and I both had to it.
First off, I guess, what was your intention with trying to find LSD? My very first experience with psychedelics was at 19 with mushrooms, and I had sort of been like searching for a long time for just something, that I felt missing in my life. Like I felt like I was having these spiritual experiences, and I would like it kind of naturally, and then I would shut them down, and it felt like I was kind of going crazy, or that it was a kind of a mental illness. So, psychedelics seemed like a route to exploring like that, and whether that was real or whether that was in my mind. In this particular case, I had taken it and had really positive experiences, and I had just gone through my first, I had my first love, and then it was like a 4-year relationship that ended up in a really difficult breakup. So my goal was kind of to process that, because I felt like nothing I was doing was really helping me process it or move on or heal.
So the goal in taking it was to like spend time with this friend, but also kind of, use it therapeutically in the best way I knew how. I didn't have a trip sitter. I didn't test my substance. I didn't think to do these things. But the goal was kind of the opposite of what happened, which was just like more re-traumatization.
You get a hold of this stuff and you take it and you start to come up. What does that come up feel like, and how is it different than an LSD come up?
It's so I can see sort of how it was sold to me in a tab, and it's I can see how it's similarly touted, and I don't think everybody necessarily has like a terrible experience with it, because like visually it mirrors LSD. It's just that those visuals were more terrifying. Like I kept seeing, rather than like with LSD, it's kind of, in my experience, been more cohesive. Like it's if you look at something, it'll maybe move in a particular way, or like you'll see visuals that aren't there. This was like that, but it was like terrifying visuals. Like I kept seeing these like flashes of red out of the corner of my eye that I knew weren't there, and I couldn't attach them to anything. And the kind of insights that you gain, on coming up and when peaking, like it was like a distorted idea of that too. Like my friend was talking to me, and I realized increasingly I couldn't understand what she was saying, and she wasn't saying coherent things herself too, and that confused me more. Like at one point she seemed to get into her head that like the goal of the trip was like seeing if we should date each other, which like has never, like we're platonic friends and that would never it's not a thing. Like it was like she was confused, and that confused me more. So it was kind of like it sends you into this reality like LSD does, but the thoughts that you have that normally kind of make sense and give you clarity were just like incredibly confusing. And it felt like I just wanted it to end. Like both of us expressed, like the most coherent thought that we both expressed to each other was like, I just want this over. Like, and then I soon just completely lost touch with reality. I don't remember running away from her or really anything that happened after that point. It was all entirely a hallucination.
Did she tell the story from her perspective? Like, does she remember you running away and kind of what you looked like?
Yeah. I've talked to her not like thoroughly about it as much because I'm trying to think. She does remember at that point she was still more lucid, so she remembers me running away, and we had gotten in some fight that, like, neither of us remember what it was about because it didn't make any sense. And that's when she was still in a place where she was coherent enough to call 911. And so they kind of questioned her. And for her, it was like, I think she had similar hallucinations, but it also just made her very, very, very depressed. Like, she was also taken to a different hospital, and a lot of that had to do with, like, her just feeling completely hopeless and was worried about me too. So I think that was kind of influencing it as well.
Did you reintegrate back into reality okay, or was there after effects?
I'm surprised by how long it took. Like I kept having kind of like really dark thoughts. Like I felt a lot of suicidal ideation when I was in the hospital. I think that was often just connected to like being like, fuck, I can't believe this just happened. There were no after effects after I was like discharged. I haven't had anything similar to it at all. There were no like flashbacks to it or anything like that.
You had mentioned people had taken this before and there's deaths associated with it, correct?
Yes, yeah.
So you can overdose on this, is that correct?
Yes, you can. From what I've read, people overdose. People also, engage in behavior where, like me, they're completely distanced from reality. So, they're putting themselves at risk that way. But yeah, you can overdose from it, which is, the other difference between it and LSD or one of them. I don't know of any instance where somebody has overdosed on LSD.
Is there like imagery or hallucinations or thoughts that particularly stand out to you in this specific trip?
Yeah, the dying was very vivid. There was, it was like a circle of people in my life, like my family and friends, just watching while somebody that I hallucinated as a police officer shot me, and I can remember like feeling it, like I can remember it being really painful, like as though I was actually being shot repeatedly. And then after I was shot, which was like over and over, there were these dogs, these like attack dogs that ran up to me and attacked me too. And I just remember like people shouting out my name, like my brother and like sister-in-law were like shouting out my name, and I could see everybody else's concerned faces just like watching while this happened. So it's like I was shot and then I was attacked by dogs. And then, like I said, it happened. I think I hallucinated that probably at least 8 times on repeat. That was kind of the most vivid thing. Also, just everything looking like a cartoon and having this weird kind of logic to its own world. It felt like I had discovered like the secret to the universe, and it was that we're all like just fucking cartoon people in like kind of like a computer simulation.
You talk about being shot by, I think you alluded to somebody that might have looked like a police officer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then you had talked about attack dogs.
Yeah.
This all seems honestly like it's grounded somewhat in reality, because your friend did call the police, and I can imagine that maybe they had to subdue you.
Yeah, now that you mention it, I do think that there was like a moment of lucidity at the end of that hallucination where I think you're right. I think it was connected to them. I think what I hallucinated at that point was the EMTs trying to, because I had fallen kind of off of this like smaller hill, and that's where they found me kind of passed out. So I think it was kind of me coming back from I was unconscious when they found me. I think it was me coming back to being awake but still being in the state of psychosis, and that's why it was so terrifying to me, because I didn't know who the fuck they were, and it felt like, I mean, I'm sure it wasn't comfortable to be taken on a gurney and like taken to the ambulance. So now that you mention it, I do remember reflecting on that and being like, that was probably when the EMTs came.
What does this tell you about drug culture today?
So many things. I remember thinking, so much shame and like stigma around it, and it was really hard to find information about 25I. And I think I'd mentioned in my email, I had worked in, at this point, it's been almost 6 years working in harm reduction. And, even with like my knowledge and like my ability, if I needed it, to have a testing kit, I didn't do any of those things. So I think like drug culture, it's part of the reason I wanted to volunteer at Zendo Project and like really respect the work of Dance Safe and organizations like that, because it needs to shift into something while we still have prohibition, where increasingly like substances, our drug supply is poisoned. Fentanyl is the main thing, but I don't think people taking LSD or MDMA expect their substances to be not what they're told. And it also taught me a lot about like the stigma I felt was partly from like the medical professionals. I got lectured by literally every medical professional in the hospital I interacted with, and just showed me what a lack of education there is about that. Like there was no attempt to understand, and it's not really their role, but there's no attempt to understand like the reason somebody takes psychedelics, or what I thought was a psychedelic. So yeah, I mean, it was really frustrating because, it was really the only avenue where I felt like I thought I was, I was with a friend, and I thought I trusted the source. So I thought I was safely doing it. And it taught me that, harm reduction is like what our drug policy should be founded on first and foremost. And it's just not, and it was a really fucking traumatizing experience, but I'm also really lucky that I have support and that I'm like alive and, didn't have any like after effects. I think for a lot of people, that's not the case. And it is surprising to me that it's underreported and not talked about. I met Rick Doblin from MAPS and told him this story. And, I think he was familiar with it, but it's not something that seems to be, that has entered like mainstream discussions really, even in like psychedelic circles. So
you had said there was no long-term repercussions from it.
Yeah, man.
Have you taken LSD since then?
Yes.
So you weren't necessarily scared away from the landscape in general. You were just put in check.
Yeah. I've taken it twice, and I used a testing kit through bunk police both times. These past two, I've taken it twice since, and yeah, it didn't scare me away because once I did the research, I realized that it confirmed what I thought, which is that I wasn't LSD. I don't react to LSD this way. So, I have taken it twice, but I tested my substance and also did it in like more of a confined setting. Like I did it at my partner at the time's apartment. So it was a little bit more contained in terms of like the setting, as opposed to I took it in a park this time.
And you had said that this episode or this experience was a part of the reason that you decided to volunteer/work for harm reduction programs.
To an extent, I was already involved with an organization where we do outreach to injection drug users and provide like naloxone and syringe exchange. And that's always been kind of like my like main like professional like interest as it is. But it made me look more into what that looks like in psychedelic communities, and that's what led me to Zendo Project, which I had been familiar with, which is a harm reduction organization that MAPS is affiliated with, that does provides like a safe container for people to process difficult psychedelic experiences at music festivals. And I did it at Lightning in a Bottle, and the way it's set up is it's right next to Dance Safe's tent, and then it's also adjacent to the medical tent. So it's we're there as like psychological support, but medical is also there if it's more a case like mine where medical attention would be required. So
so people, the way that I have it pictured is they
Mm-hmm.
are at a music festival, they take some hallucinogen, and say they start having a bad trip. Their friends, or maybe they themselves, make it to your tent, and then
Yeah.
what is experienced after that?
So so there's a few different roles that people play. I was a sitter, meaning there's like somebody called the greeter, and that's who either that person or often, like you said, it's a friend of theirs who takes them there. And, there's like a short like what's your name kind of quick as possible, kind of just a couple questions for that person, and then they're assigned a sitter. So I would be like assigned somebody. Sometimes I'd have like up to maybe like 3 or 4 people, depending on how busy it was. It's a 24-hour service throughout the festival, so sometimes it was very slow, and at night it was very busy. But basically, somebody comes in, and I might be given some information about, from the person who did the intake about what's going on with them. Or they might not be willing to share, which is fine. Oftentimes I just was sitting with people and kind of just having that like sober presence was really helpful for people. Usually it was like somebody who took LSD or took something similar to that, thinking, it would just be a recreational substance, and then a lot of trauma would come up, and that was kind of what was making the trip difficult. So sometimes a few visitors would kind of want to talk that through and process that with me or with a different sitter. It kind of varies widely. Like there's people who I remember there's some people where their drug reaction is like they're again like so distorted from reality that like they try running out of the tent, and we have to kind of contain them in like a non-aggressive way. I didn't have to do that. A lot of mine were people who just kind of wanted somebody to sit with them while they cried or processed something that was coming up for them.
Would you try to coach them through it, or do you just kind of sit and listen? It seems like a really sensitive time.
Yeah, it's hard to navigate kind of knowing exactly how to, I worked at a crisis hotline for 4 years, and that's kind of like my part of my other background, where I kind of felt more comfortable with that role. But it is kind of navigating like how much this person wants you to ask them questions, and how much they kind of just want to sit there or talk to you. A lot of the time it's one of the principles that they espouse, that Zendo espouses, is sitting, not guiding. Meaning, like it's not a therapy session. Even if you come in with that background, it's letting that person kind of just have space to share with you. And I did ask questions sometimes that were open ended, but it was primarily centered around just what they might need, even if it was simple things like water. Part of the reason that the tent is, I think, really important in settings like that is I know I was really overwhelmed sober at this festival, just by like how fucking loud and overactive everything is. And so as much as possible, they create kind of like a quieter space where there's just like simple lighting, and like there's comfortable seating, like there's blankets where you can like sleep and things like that as well. So it's it's meant to be a space away from kind of the overactivity of the festival too. And actually, yeah, a couple people were sober and just wanted to come in too, which was fine.
Where do you see yourself going next? Or would you like to see this type of movement evolve in a certain way?
Do you mean with like psychedelic harm reduction specifically, or
Well, it kind of sounds like, I mean, with the crisis hotline that you were a part of, and then being a part of that tent that helps helps people through a bad experience, trip-wise. It kind of seems like, I mean, you followed a certain type of path, which is largely based around harm reduction. I'm kind of wondering where you would like to see that path go.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, for me personally, my goal is to, now that I'm not doing crisis work, I'd like to be in a role where I do harm reduction, working really with drug users, active injection drug users. And then eventually my ideal is to go back to school for nursing, and use kind of, I feel like I've kind of flatlined with my skills, and nursing would be the most impactful thing I can think of to have skills to work with that population. I would, like most of us doing this work, would love for safe consumption spaces to exist in the States. So my dream is to work in that kind of setting, like either street nursing or some harm reduction setting like that, where I can, provide medical services to people. I am interested in working with Zendo again and that type of work too, but it's kind of secondary to what I think is most pressing, just nationally right now, which is our overdose crisis, which is, to me, completely manufactured and could be pretty much addressed very quickly if we really gave a fuck about drug users.
Why are you interested in harm reduction?
I think part of it has to do with being interested in drugs, like using, like I knew from maybe like age 12 or 13 that I was going to be taking them. I still take them regularly, many different types. And so, I also have a lot of privilege that has really protected me in using. Like, I can use pretty openly. Most people in my life, even in my last job, were aware that I was using drugs regularly. So I think there are a lot of privileges that I have that protect me, and it really makes me angry, and especially after having worked with this population for so long, to see the impacts of the drug war that I have for the most part avoided, except for certain things like the traumatizing trip. So harm reduction just feels like the most impactful thing for me, where I'm passionate about drug users for a lot of different reasons. There are people in my life who have really benefited from it, and it just feels like there needs to be this culture shift where we talk about everything differently, and people know that drug users aren't shitty people for using drugs. So that's kind of, I don't see those conversations happening very frequently outside of the scope of harm reduction and drug policy communities. Like, the treatment field is just so fucked up in so many ways. So, working in substance use, I really feel like I found my people in harm reduction.
This episode was produced by me, Philip Johnson. All songs used can be found in the description section of this episode. If you liked what you heard today, please subscribe. Also, rate and leave a review on iTunes. It goes a really, really long way. If you'd like to become a patron of Psychotropic, or if you'd like to check out some Psychotropic related swag, or if you have a story to share, you can do all of this at psychotropicpodcast.com. If you're interested in getting a better idea about upcoming episodes, be sure to follow Psychotropic on Instagram at Psychotropic Podcast, all one word. Thanks again for listening, everybody. See you next time.